The stars above Krieg had long since dimmed, their cold light struggling to pierce the poison clouds that swirled endlessly over a dead world. The soil was blackened and cracked, steeped in the ashes of billions. Vast cities, once proud monuments to human achievement, lay in silent ruin, their towers shattered, their streets drowned in the still radioactive mist of their own destruction. Even the wind carried no song, only the faint groan of broken metal and the whisper of dust shifting over the bones of a planet that had chosen death over surrender. In the heart of this wasteland, a lone figure stood upon the fractured shell of an old habdome, its glass long since melted into jagged rivers by nuclear fire. He was clad in the ash-grey greatcoat and rebreather of Krieg, his eyes hidden behind lenses that reflected nothing but the dim twilight. In his hand, he carried a tattered banner, the last remnant of his regiment's colours, scorched and torn, yet still bearing the double-headed eagle. Beneath his boots, the ground was soft, as though the earth itself had rotted from within. The war for Krieg was over, though there were none left to call it victory. In the end, there had been no armies to defeat, no cities to capture. Only the slow, inevitable death of a people who refused to kneel. The civil war had burned for centuries, a grinding conflict of attrition where life was the only currency worth spending. Entire generations had been born in trenches and perished in the same mud, their names lost even before they had been spoken aloud. And when the final exchange came, the great unleashing of atomic fire that seared the sky and shattered the crust, there had been no one left to remember the reasons why. He closed his eyes, not in sorrow, but in acceptance. The air stung through the filters of his mask, each breath tasting faintly of iron and decay. He had been a child when the last bombs fell, too young to understand what it meant to survive when survival itself felt like treachery. Now he was a commander, though not by choice. Command had been thrust upon him in the same way as the rifle and the gas mask, without ceremony, without joy. It was simply another burden to bear until the end. Around him, the last of Krieg's surviving soldiers stood in silent ranks. Their greatcoats were caked with dust, their boots half buried in the skeletal earth. None spoke, none moved. They had gathered here for one purpose: to take the Emperor's oath, to give themselves utterly and without reservation to a master they had never seen and never would. For Krieg had no future, no homes to return to, only penance to pay. The sky above rumbled faintly, a distant thunder that spoke of orbital engines. Somewhere beyond the poison clouds, the ships of the Imperium waited. They would take these soldiers away from the ruins of their world, carrying them into wars they could not yet imagine, against enemies whose names they did not know, and they would go gladly, for there was no other path. But before those words could be spoken, before the vow could be made, something in the man's chest ached, a hollow space that the bombs and the fire had not destroyed, a space where questions still whispered, questions about the worth of such sacrifice, about whether obedience was virtue or cowardice. These were thoughts no son of Krieg was supposed to have, and yet he had them. My friends, my brothers and sisters, we have lived through the fire. We have watched our world burn, and yet here we stand, breathing in the dust of all we have lost. We have given everything, and we will give more still. I will not lie to you. There will be no end to this road, not for us, but perhaps the Emperor will see our service and find it worthy. Perhaps our ashes will mean something. And now, to you who listen to this tale, wherever you are. I speak to you not as a son of Krieg, but as one who knows what it means to lose everything. We truly love and care for you. You are part of this story now. So tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. The commander stepped forward, boots crunching on the brittle glass, and raised his voice against the endless wind. His soldiers raised their rifles in silent salute. Beneath the dim, choking sky of Krieg, the oath to the Emperor was spoken, and with it, the last chapter of their world closed, and the first of their eternal war began. The ship that bore them away from Krieg was a vast, steel-clad coffin, its corridors echoing with the measured cadence of booted feet and the whisper of respirators. There was no joy in their departure, no sense of escape, only the cold weight of duty pressing down on every man and woman in that armoured procession. Through narrow viewports, the planet they had destroyed receded into the darkness, its surface still glowing faintly with the scars of atomic fire. For most, it would be the last sight of their home. For many, it was the first time they had ever seen it from above. The commander stood alone at the prow observation deck, the glass before him reinforced with layers of steel mesh. He watched the sphere of Krieg diminish until it became just another starless shadow in the void. In that fading world, he saw the truth he had carried since childhood. There was nothing left to save, nothing left to fight for but the debt they owed. He had sworn to pay it in blood, and the Imperium was all too willing to collect. When the fleet reached the staging world of Carthium, they disembarked into rain that stung like acid and streets lined with iron statues of Imperial heroes. Here, the surviving regiments of Krieg were met by ranks of commissars in long black coats, their faces carved from stone. Among them was one whose eyes lingered on the commander with a look that was not curiosity, but calculation. The man's name was Varen, and his voice was as sharp as the saber at his side. "Your people are zealous," he said without preamble, "but zeal without discipline is a candle in the wind. I will see that you burn as long as the Emperor requires." The commander offered no reply. Words were weapons too easily turned against their wielder, and in the Imperium silence could be a shield. But he noted the commissar's gaze, the faint tightening of his jaw. Varen was not here to inspire them, but to watch them, to judge them. They were quartered in steel barracks that reeked of machine oil and stale air. Meals were brief, consisting of nutrient paste dispensed with the efficiency of an assembly line. The men and women of Krieg accepted it without question, for they had been raised to see such deprivation as normal. Still, the commander noticed the way other Imperial guardsmen looked at them, a mixture of awe and unease, as though the Krieg regiments were not soldiers but spectres. He heard whispers from nearby bunks. "They're all dead inside. They fight like they want to die." Training began before dawn. Endless drills in trench assault, gas warfare, siegecraft. The Krieg soldiers endured without complaint, but the commander could see the toll in their movements, a weariness not of the body, but of the soul. When Varen addressed them, he spoke of service as an act of faith, of the Emperor as the only salvation for their world's sin. Yet beneath those words lay an edge of threat, a reminder that failure was not an option. One night, the commander stood with Sergeant Hall, an older veteran whose face was a map of scars beneath his mask. They watched the rain fall on the parade ground, turning the soil to a thin, grey slurry. "You ever think," Hall said quietly, "about what it means to fight for someone else's cause?" The commander glanced at him, but the sergeant's eyes were fixed on the mud. "Krieg's war is over," Hall continued, But the Imperium, it'll never be done. Maybe that's the point. Maybe they need us to keep dying, so the rest don't have to. The words settled like ash in the commander's mind. He had no answer, and Harl didn't seem to expect one. The rain kept falling, drumming softly against their helmets. Somewhere beyond the parade ground, the sound of gunfire echoed. Live drills at the far range. 2 weeks later, the orders came. The Krieg regiments were to be deployed to a contested death world in the Eridan Reach, where Imperial forces were locked in a grinding siege against an entrenched enemy. Varen delivered the news with no ceremony, his tone flat as if announcing the weather. This will be your first service to the Emperor beyond your homeworld. You will take your orders without question. You will not falter, and you will prove, in the eyes of the Imperium, that Krieg's loyalty is without flaw. The commander stood before his regiment as the transports were loaded, his voice carrying over the hiss of respirators and the clank of boots on steel. "We do not fight for victory," he said. "We fight because there is no other path for us. Remember this. Every trench we take, every breath we draw in the Emperor's name, is another step toward the redemption our world will never see." The engines roared to life, drowning out all else. As the ship lifted into the rain-dark sky, the commander caught sight of Varen watching him from the embarkation ramp, expression unreadable. It was not the look of a man who trusted, but perhaps the look of one who intended to find out whether this son of Krieg was worth the life he still carried. The void swallowed the staging world behind them. Ahead lay another battlefield, another planet to die on. For the commander, it was just the next chapter in a war without end. The death world of Bellis Corona's Reach greeted them not with open battle, but with an unbroken wall of grey. From orbit, it looked like a sphere drowned in ash, its seas choked with oil-slick waters and its continents carved by endless scars of trench lines that could be seen even from the void. The land was a living grave, breathing only through the smoke of its own ceaseless war. The Imperial fleet hung above it like carrion birds, their prows already stained with the soot of the atmosphere below. When the dropships descended, the world swallowed them whole. The sky was a roiling bruise, the air thick enough to feel through the rebreathers. The moment the landing struts met the churned mud, the sound of distant bombardment rolled through the earth, a constant low thunder that seemed to come from all directions at once. Here, war was not an event. It was the weather, the ground, the air. The commander stepped down into the mire, his boots sinking until the mud lapped at his greaves. All around, his soldiers moved with the same mechanical efficiency that had carried them from Krieg's ashes. Their greatcoats were already dark with wet grime, their rifles held high above the sludge. The commissar, Varen, remained close, his gaze shifting from the men to the horizon, as though he could already see where some of them would fall. The forward trenches lay a mile from the landing site, and the march to reach them was a crawl through a world that seemed designed to consume flesh and steel alike. The ground was littered with shattered helmets and half-buried bones, their owners claimed by the mud years ago. Rusted barbed wire rose from the muck like dead thorns, coiling around anything unfortunate enough to stumble into them. The commander's men stepped around these relics without pause, for they had seen the same on Krieg. When they reached the front, the scale of the siege revealed itself. The enemy's fortifications lay beyond a no-man's land of churned earth and water-filled craters. The Imperial guns behind them answered the enemy's shelling in a rhythm older than any of them. The back and forth, thunder of a war that had forgotten why it started. In the nearest trench, a line of pale-faced soldiers from another regiment, turned to watch the new arrivals. Their expressions were unreadable, but their eyes betrayed a mix of relief and unease. Reinforcements meant more bodies to fill the lines, but the reputation of the Death Corps was a thing both respected and feared. That night, rain poured without pause, turning the dugouts into drowning pits. The commander walked the line, passing between huddled shapes in soaked greatcoats, each man and woman silent except for the hiss of their respirators. The soldiers of Krieg neither sang nor spoke before battle. They simply waited, the way one waits for an inevitable end. From the far side of the trench, Sergeant Hall appeared, his coat streaming with water. "They say the enemy has been dug in here for 10 years, Hall murmured, his voice low enough to be lost in the rain. "We'll be lucky if we move the line 10 feet in 10 months. The commander gave no reply. There was no point in discussing the scale of it. The war would last as long as it took to grind both sides to dust. Instead, he glanced toward the horizon, where lightning briefly lit the enemy's high walls. In that instant, he thought he saw movement, a flicker of silhouettes in the flashes, shifting like shadows on the parapets. 2 days later, the first orders came. A night raid to probe the enemy's forward trench. The men moved in silence, crouching low through the sucking mud, each step threatening to tear boots from their feet. The air was thick with the stink of rot and cordite, and every breath burned the throat despite the filters. Ahead, the enemy's lines lay silent, but the commander knew that silence was a lie. When the signal flare burst in the sky, the night erupted into chaos. Lasfire hissed through the rain. Shells tore the ground into geysers of black water, and the air filled with the shriek of shrapnel. The commander moved forward with his squad, his rifle spitting disciplined bursts into the enemy positions. Somewhere to his left, a Krieg grenadier vanished in a flash of light and a spray of mud, his body swallowed before it could hit the ground. The fight was over in minutes. The enemy had been ready, their trenches lined with interlocking fields of fire that cut down the first wave before they could breach the wire. The survivors withdrew in grim silence, dragging the wounded through the sucking mud. Back in the Imperial lines, Varen met them with folded arms, his voice a cold blade. "You went in with 40, he said. "You came back with 23. Consider that your first lesson. The Emperor does not care for the lives you lose, only for the ground you take." The commander met his gaze through the lenses of his mask, but said nothing. He knew that this was not the last such lesson. The mud, the rain, the enemy guns, they were just the opening verse of a song that would play endlessly, drowning every name in the same chorus of death. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he felt the weight of the dreams that had come to him each night since landing. Dreams of Krieg's burning cities, where the smoke curled like fingers, reaching for him, refusing to let go. The trenches of Bellis Corona's Reach stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of mud and steel that seemed to move with the will of the planet itself. Rain fell in sheets, mixing with the blood and ash, creating a stench that clung to every breath. The commander moved among his men, boots sinking into the thick mire, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of life or death, often indistinguishable in this world. The war was a constant rhythm, a pounding heartbeat of fire and earth, and the soldiers of Krieg had learned to march to it without question. At night, when the rain eased to a drizzle and the faint glow of distant artillery lit the clouds, the dead spoke, not in words, but in memory. The commander felt them in every trench, in every hollowed-out bunker, in every discarded helmet half buried in the mud. Sometimes he imagined their faces turning to him with accusation, sometimes with silent approval. The dead of Krieg were everywhere, and in that there was no solace. Only the weight of generations who had been raised to die, and now demanded that the living continue their penance. Sergeant Harl was beside him as they navigated a flooded trench, the older man's face half hidden beneath his respirator mask. "You hear them too, don't you?" he asked softly, though his tone carried the weight of certainty rather than question. The commander did not answer immediately. The voices of the past were persistent, curling around him like smoke, reminding him of what had been lost and what would be demanded next. "They don't sleep," Harl continued. "They never sleep. Not here, not on Krieg. And neither can you. Not if you want to keep your men alive." The commander clenched his jaw beneath the mask. He had never imagined that survival would feel like betrayal. But each decision he made in these trenches cut deeper than any enemy weapon. A misstep could mean dozens of lives, yet hesitation could doom even more. Loyalty and obedience were twin blades that sometimes threatened his own heart. From the far end of the trench came the sound of boots moving. Not his men, not enemy soldiers, but someone else. Shadows flickered in the dim light cast by storm clouds and distant shell fire. The commander raised a hand, signaling for silence. Varen's sharp silhouette emerged from the gloom, his presence a constant reminder of judgment. He moved through the trench with practiced precision, his eyes scanning every face as though weighing each soul. "These trenches," Varen said, without turning to the commander, "are no place for hesitation. Every man here owes the Emperor his life. Do not forget that, or I will remind you in ways that are far less forgiving than mud and rain." The commander met his gaze and nodded, not out of fear, but acknowledgement. There was truth in Varen's words, harsh and unyielding as the land beneath their boots. They were soldiers bred to die, and yet the living had their own ghosts. That night, as he patrolled the lines, he found himself speaking quietly to the memory of a young recruit who had fallen days earlier, whose name he had already begun to forget. He whispered a vow to remember, though he knew the war would erode even that promise. Meanwhile, tensions within the regiment began to surface in subtle ways. A fellow officer, Lieutenant Corvin, had begun questioning orders, suggesting alternative strategies that skirted the edge of what the Imperium would tolerate. His suggestions, though tactically sound, hinted at ambition, a desire to stand above the regiment, to prove himself capable while others perished in the mud. The commander watched him carefully, understanding that in these trenches, trust was a fragile commodity. One misstep could turn loyalty into betrayal in the blink of an eye. That night, the commander dreamed again of Krieg, of its cities smouldering, the air thick with ash, and the cries of those who had died too soon. In the dream, the dead reached for him, their hands skeletal and cold. He awoke in the trench, the rain still falling, and realized that the dead did not only haunt the past. They haunted the present, guiding every choice he made, shaping every step forward. The next morning, the regiment was ordered to advance into a sector known as the Black Fen, a labyrinth of waterlogged craters and collapsed bunkers. The enemy had fortified the area with interlocking fields of fire, and it became immediately clear that the attack would not be a simple engagement, but a test of endurance and will. As the soldiers of Krieg moved into position, the commander could see the fear beneath their stoic masks. It was not the fear of dying, they were bred for that, but the fear of useless death, of sacrifice without purpose. As artillery began to fall, shaking the trench walls and sending sprays of mud into the air, the commander felt the weight of every life in his charge. Orders were given, rifles fired, and the regiment advanced with the deliberate, grim efficiency that had defined them since leaving Krieg. Each step forward was paid for in blood, each advance a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. By dusk, the Black Fen was theirs, but only in the sense that the enemy had retreated. The commander surveyed the mud-choked battlefield, counting the survivors, noting the injuries, and feeling the familiar ache of guilt pressing into his chest. Sergeant Hall approached him, his face streaked with mud and rain. "We've won the ground," he said quietly, "but at what cost?" The commander said nothing, letting the wind carry away his words. The dead whispered in the trenches, the rain continued to fall, and the war went. On each victory was hollow, each advance a reminder that in this endless conflict, the soldiers of Krieg were trapped between obedience and the ghosts of their own pasts. The Black Fen lay behind them, like a wound that would never fully heal. The mud had hardened in some places, leaving deep cracks that trapped the boots of those who survived, while in other areas it remained treacherous, swallowing the fallen before they could be recovered. The commander walked through it, his boots heavy with the residue of war, every step a reminder that the cost of obedience was never measured in victories, but in lives spent and lost. Orders came swiftly from the sector command. A fortified enemy position, known as the Iron Bastion, had to be taken by dawn. The plan was simple: frontal assault, relentless artillery support, and the unwavering advance of the Death Corps. But the commander, looking over the map spread before him, knew better. The terrain was unforgiving, the enemy well prepared, and the lives of his soldiers would be a currency exchanged for a mile of earth the enemy would reclaim as soon as they withdrew. He could feel the weight of their expectations, the invisible chains of duty pressing into his chest. Sergeant Hall stood beside him, eyes narrowing as he traced the trench lines with a gloved finger. "Orders are orders," he said, voice low. "But that doesn't mean we have to ignore what's in front of us. There's a difference between obedience and folly." The commander considered this, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself the thought of defiance. To alter the plan slightly, to save even a fraction of his men, would be a betrayal of orders, yes, but perhaps it was a betrayal worth making. The decision hung between them like a storm cloud, heavy and oppressive, promising thunder that would not wait long. Night fell over the staging grounds, and the soldiers of Krieg moved into position. Their masks reflected the pale light of the moon, their rifles clutched tightly as though they could hold back the universe itself. The commander walked among them, speaking quietly to a few of the newer recruits, who looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Remember," he said, "the Emperor does not require your fear. He requires your will, and your will is stronger than any bullet, any explosion, any world set against you." By the time the first shells of the assault rained down, the regiment was in place. The mud spattered with fire and fragments of earth, each detonation shaking the trench walls and sending torrents of water cascading into the soldiers' helmets. Amidst the chaos, the commander moved forward, directing squads with calm precision. Lives were lost in moments, some without even seeing the enemy, swallowed by collapsing earth or stray shrapnel. In the heat of the assault, Lieutenant Corvin appeared at the commander's side, his expression a mix of awe and fear. "Sir," he shouted over the thunder of artillery, "they've cut the wire. The forward trench is ours." The commander nodded but said nothing. Every advance brought new horrors, new bodies to account for, and yet the officers around him seemed eager to claim glory in the blood of their men. Hours later, the Iron Bastion had fallen, but the victory was hollow. The regiment had taken the ground, yes, but the losses were staggering. More than half the men were dead or injured, and the surviving soldiers moved with mechanical precision, faces etched with exhaustion and grief. The commander stood atop a collapsed parapet, surveying the battlefield. He could hear the faint cries of those still trapped beneath rubble, the hiss of steam from ruptured pipes and artillery craters, and the distant, eerie wail of artillery shells falling somewhere behind the lines. Varen approached silently, his boots crunching against broken earth. "Well done," he said, voice flat as steel. "And yet it is never enough. The Emperor does not remember individual deeds. He remembers results. Your men survive, and yet they will die again tomorrow. That is the nature of service." The commander's jaw tightened. He knew the truth in Varen's words, but he also knew that obedience could not be measured by victories alone. Somewhere in the mud, the fallen whispered reminders of Krieg, of the generations who had marched before, who had died, and whose names were already fading from memory. They demanded that the living honor their sacrifice not with blind compliance, but with choices, even dangerous, defiant ones. Later, as the surviving soldiers made camp in hastily dug shelters, the commander gathered a small group. "We follow orders," he said quietly, "but we do not blindly walk to slaughter. We move with purpose, with eyes open. No man or woman under my command dies without meaning. Remember that." The words were not a defiance of the Imperium, nor a challenge to Varen, but a recognition of the weight they all carried. Survival in the trenches of Bellis Corona was not enough. Each breath, each step, each command mattered, for it was a testament to the humanity they clung to, even as Krieg's legacy of death pressed upon them. By the next morning, the regiment was already in motion again, marching toward another engagement. The commander's thoughts lingered on the men lost, on the thin line between loyalty and sacrifice, and on the quiet, gnawing knowledge that obedience would never absolve the sins of the past, nor the inevitable toll of the future. The march from the Iron Bastion to the next objective was slow, deliberate, and soaked in rain that never seemed to end. The mud of Bellis Corona clung to every boot, every weapon, and every piece of armor, turning movement into a labor of will. The soldiers of Krieg did not complain, though their faces beneath the respirators were masks of fatigue and determination. Each step forward was a testament to endurance, a proof of loyalty, and a reminder that survival was never granted. It had to be earned again and again, day after day. The commander walked at the head of his regiment, rifle slung across his back, eyes scanning the horizon for threats both visible and unseen. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing against him, not as a commander of men, but as the bearer of their lives, their honor, and their history. In the endless grey of rain-soaked trenches and shattered landscape, the ghosts of Krieg whispered constantly, their voices a chorus of expectation and accusation. As the regiment neared the contested zone known as the Shattered Fields, the commander noticed Lieutenant Corvin lingering behind, moving with careful, hesitant steps. Corvan's ambition had not waned. It had sharpened, now tempered by survival and the taste of command. "Sir," he said quietly when the commander approached, "there's a flank we could take. It's risky, but it could save some lives and give us an advantage." The commander studied the map they carried, tracing the lines of craters and ruined fortifications. He knew that taking this flank could indeed reduce casualties in the immediate assault, but it also meant disobeying explicit orders. Obedience was a sacred law among Krieg's soldiers, and yet the lives of men weighed more heavily in his heart than the edicts of command. He made his choice with the calm deliberation that had kept him alive thus far. "We move the flank," he said, voice low, "but every step is accounted for. Follow my command, and we will survive together." The maneuver was perilous. The ground was uneven, littered with jagged remnants of old artillery and half-buried bodies. Enemy snipers had already spotted the movement, sending streaks of las fire and tracer fire across the rain-dark sky. Each shot was a reminder of the fragility of life, each explosion a mark on the soul of the soldiers trudging through the mud. Yet Krieg's men advanced, disciplined and unyielding, their training and determination making them almost spectral in their precision. Hours later, the flank had been taken, and the regiment held a position that gave them a tactical advantage. The commander surveyed the field, noting the casualties, the equipment lost, and the grim determination etched into the surviving faces. Sergeant Hall approached, his respirator fogging slightly in the cold, wet air. "You chose wisely," he said softly, "but there's no end to this. No matter what we do, the cost is always more than we can bear." The commander said nothing. He felt the truth of Hall's words pressing into him, a weight heavier than any weapon. Obedience could protect them from punishment. Loyalty could earn them honor, but neither could shield them from the slow erosion of hope, nor from the ghosts of those who had died and would never see the end of this endless war. Night fell again, and with it came a stillness that was almost unnatural. The soldiers huddled in the trenches, wet and shivering, yet their resolve remained unbroken. The commander moved through the line, speaking quietly to those he passed. "We are more than orders," he said. "We are more than soldiers. Each life here matters. Each step we take matters. Do not let the mud, the rain, or the thunder of guns make you forget that." Even as he spoke, his mind wrestled with doubts. The lives lost in every engagement, the constant strain, the impossible expectations. It was enough to crush any man's spirit. And yet, the soldiers of Krieg endured. They endured because they had no choice, because the memory of their homeworld demanded it, because the oath to the Emperor bound them beyond reason. The next day brought another engagement, as relentless and merciless as the last. The regiment advanced into the shattered fields, taking fire and giving it back in equal measure. The commander moved among them, giving orders, adjusting positions, saving lives when he could, and watching as others were claimed by the mud, the rain, and the enemy. Each action carried weight, each decision demanded sacrifice, and each moment tested the thin line between duty and conscience. By the end of the day, the regiment held its position, but at a terrible cost. Many of the men were gone, many more wounded, and the commander felt the familiar ache in his chest. Not grief, not guilt, but the hollow weight of responsibility that refused to lift. He knew this was only the beginning, that the war would grind on, claiming lives, testing loyalties, and eroding even the strongest spirits. And yet, in the eyes of those who remained, he saw the same determination that had carried them from Krieg's ashes. They would endure, they would fight, and they would survive, as long as they could. As night descended once more over the rain-darkened trenches, the commander looked out over the shattered fields and whispered to himself, a vow and a prayer intertwined. For every life lost, we will remember. For every step forward, we will endure. For Krieg, for the Emperor, we march on. The day broke over the shattered fields with a low, sullen light that barely penetrated the ash-laden clouds. The ground, churned into a treacherous morass by weeks of artillery fire and relentless rain, seemed almost alive, sucking at the boots of the living as if to claim them for the countless dead who lay buried beneath its surface. From their vantage in the trenches, the commander and his regiment watched the enemy lines, dark silhouettes against the grey horizon, fortified yet trembling under the endless weight of the imperial assault. Orders came from the sector command with the impassive efficiency of a machine. Advance, take the high ground, and hold it at all costs. The words carried no room for hesitation, no allowance for the cost in lives that would inevitably be exacted. Yet in that cold, bureaucratic command, the commander saw the echoes of Krieg, of endless war, of sacrifice, and of a duty that demanded obedience above all else. He gathered his officers in the trench, the rain dripping from their greatcoats and helmets. "Every man and woman here has a choice," he said quietly, "though it is a choice bound by duty. Move with me, fight with me, and remember that every step forward is a debt we pay to the Emperor and to those who fell before us." The advance was brutal. Mud and water clawed at the soldiers' feet, turning every movement into labor. Enemy fire raked the line in streaks of las flare, tearing into the trench walls and spraying debris into faces already coated with mud and exhaustion. Amid the chaos, the regiment of Krieg moved like shadows, disciplined and unyielding, each man and woman a ghost of their former selves, molded by decades of warfare and loss. Lieutenant Corvin flanked the commander, eyes wide beneath his respirator as he directed squads through the flooded trenches. "Sir," he shouted over the din, "we can take the ridge faster if we split into 2 columns. We might lose fewer lives that way." The commander's eyes traced the terrain, noting the enemy fortifications, the mud-choked craters, and the interlocking fields of fire. Splitting the regiment was a risk, a deviation from orders, but he weighed the lives of his men against the rigid obedience demanded by Varen and the Imperium. "Do it," he said finally, voice steady. "But every squad stays in constant contact. No one is lost alone." As they moved, the enemy revealed the first of many surprises. Hidden artillery emplacements erupted, their fire precise and unrelenting. Trenches collapsed under the shock of shells, and mudslides swallowed soldiers whole before anyone could react. The commander's heart ached with each loss, each life extinguished before it could matter. He moved swiftly among his men, issuing orders, adjusting positions, pulling those he could from the grasp of the earth, and watching as others disappeared into the mire. By midday, the 2 columns had reached the enemy's forward positions, and a vicious firefight ensued. Lasfire tore through the air, explosions shook the ground, and the cries of men and women cut through the storm. The commander led from the front, his rifle barking disciplined bursts, and yet every victory came with a cost measured in blood and the hollow ache of conscience. Sergeant Hall fought beside him, a grim sentinel, his voice a steadying force amidst the chaos. "We endure," Hall shouted, "because there is no other path. Remember that." In the midst of the battle, a messenger arrived with news that struck the commander with quiet dread. Lieutenant Corvin had been gravely injured, trapped beneath a collapsed parapet while attempting to secure an enemy position. The commander's mind raced as he gave rapid orders to extract him, knowing that hesitation could cost more lives than action. Amid the thunder of shells and the spray of mud, a small squad moved to lift Corvan, free. His breathing was shallow, his eyes wide with pain and fear, and the commander felt the weight of every decision he had made pressing down on him like the clouds above. The extraction succeeded, but not without cost. Several soldiers were lost to enemy fire, and the regiment was forced to consolidate its position in the newly taken ground. The commander surveyed the shattered fields, now scarred deeper by the fighting, and felt the cold, unyielding truth of Krieg's legacy pressing in. Victory was never final, survival was never guaranteed, and every choice bore consequences heavier than any armor could bear. That night, the commander walked among his men. The rain reduced to a soft drizzle that soaked through greatcoats and armor alike. He spoke quietly to the survivors, his voice a thin thread in the wind. "We have taken ground, yes, but the cost is more than numbers can reflect. Remember the fallen. Remember that each step forward is paid for with their sacrifice. We endure not for glory, not for pride, but because the Emperor and our brothers and sisters demand it. We march on, always forward, always enduring." In the shadows of the trenches, he felt the weight of unseen eyes. Not only the enemy, but the dead of Krieg, who had followed them from homeworld to deathworld. Their judgment eternal, their presence a constant reminder that duty was more than orders, and survival more than mere life. The dawn of the next day promised more engagement, more loss, and the unbroken rhythm of war. The commander knew it would test the regiment's endurance, loyalty, and spirit as never before. And somewhere deep in the mud and ash of the shattered fields, he felt the first stirrings of doubt, not in his men, but in himself. How much of Krieg's legacy was salvation, and how much was curse? The shattered fields had grown into a theatre of relentless suffering. Each day, the regiment of Krieg fought not only against the enemy, but against the mud, the rain, and the exhaustion that threatened to claim even the strongest minds. The commander moved among his men with a careful, measured pace, watching the strain etch itself into their faces beneath respirators, into the slump of shoulders under wet greatcoats, into the trembling hands that still clutched rifles as if life itself depended upon it. Here, survival was not a right. It was a relentless challenge of endurance and will. The next objective was a ridge known as the Bleak Spine, a jagged scar of rock and ash that dominated the horizon. Sector Command demanded its capture at first light, claiming it as vital to the larger strategic picture. The commander studied the maps again, his eyes tracing the treacherous terrain, noting every crater, every collapsed bunker, every hidden trench. He knew the assault would cost lives, more than he was willing to lose. And yet the orders were clear. Lieutenant Corvan, now bandaged and still pale from his near-death extraction, approached the commander. "Sir," he said quietly, "we can change the formation. If we take the eastern approach, we might avoid the worst of their defenses." The commander studied him carefully. Corvan's suggestion was sound, but it also carried a risk of insubordination. Obedience was the lifeblood of Krieg, yet survival demanded calculated defiance. "We take the eastern approach," he said finally, "but every squad maintains contact. We move as one. Lives matter more than orders, but not more than cohesion." The regiment advanced under a grey sky that promised more rain. Mud clung to boots and armor, waterlogged trenches threatened to collapse at every step, and the enemy's snipers and hidden artillery harried them with precision. The death corps moved with mechanical efficiency, a phalanx of determination and grim purpose. Every breath was a labor, every step a struggle, yet they endured. Halfway to the Bleak Spine, the first signs of internal tension appeared. Some soldiers, exhausted and disillusioned, began questioning the relentless pace of orders. A small group, led by Corporal Dresk, muttered under their breath about the futility of this endless war, about the cost of obedience, about the endless cycle of death. The commander approached them, his presence both calm and formidable. "You serve because it is demanded," he said quietly, voice carrying through the mud and rain. "But you endure because you choose to. Remember why you march, and remember who you are. Krieg does not forgive doubt, and neither will I, but your choice is your own." The words settled over them like ash, and for a moment, silence reigned, broken only by distant artillery fire and the groan of earth under bombardment. The march continued, each step bringing them closer to the bleak spine, each breath a reminder of the lives already lost, each glance at fallen comrades a warning that the dead were always watching. By midday, the regiment reached the foot of the ridge. The enemy's fortifications loomed ahead, a tangle of barbed wire, trenches, and hidden emplacements. Last fire tore through the air, artillery shook the ground beneath them, and the first volleys of hand-launched explosives sent men flying into the mud. The commander moved forward, issuing orders, adjusting squads, and pulling the injured from harm's way. Each action was a balance between obedience and survival, between loyalty and pragmatism, between duty and conscience. In the midst of the assault, a betrayal emerged. Lieutenant Corvin, despite his recovery, had begun pushing his own initiative, directing squads without waiting for orders. His ambition, fueled by survival and his taste of near death, now threatened the cohesion of the regiment. The commander confronted him in the midst of shellfire, shouting over the din, "You act alone, and you endanger everyone." Corvan's eyes blazed with a mix of fear and resolve. "I saved them," he yelled. "If we wait for orders, more die." The commander's chest tightened. Corvan's words were true, yet they skirted the edges of insubordination. In Krieg, obedience was survival, but survival sometimes demanded defiance. The two men exchanged a tense look, understanding that leadership was never clean, never simple, and never without cost. Corvan relented, but the tension lingered like smoke over the battlefield. By dusk, the bleak spine was taken, but at a staggering cost. Half the regiment lay dead or injured, and the survivors moved like shadows through the mud and wreckage. The commander surveyed the field, noting the silence of the dead, the emptiness of the trenches, and the unending horizon of ash and smoke. He felt the weight of every life lost pressing against him, and knew that each step forward had been paid for in blood and the gnawing ache of conscience. As night fell, the survivors huddled in the trenches, silent except for the soft murmur of rain and the distant rumble of artillery. The commander walked among them, whispering words of encouragement and remembrance. He knew that loyalty and obedience were tested not only by the enemy, but by the choices each man and woman made in the silence between orders. Somewhere in the shadows, the ghosts of Krieg watched, their judgment unwavering, their presence eternal. And in that presence, the commander understood the cruel truth. Victory was never final, survival was never guaranteed, and every choice bore consequences that no mud, no rain, and no obedience could wash away. The dawn over the bleak spine was an oppressive grey, heavy with the scent of mud, blood, and lingering smoke. The regiment of Krieg moved like a silent tide, boots sinking into churned earth, rifles held tight, respirators hissing with each measured breath. The past days had left them hollowed, both in body and spirit, yet the relentless drum of duty demanded they advance once more. There was no rest here, only the cold rhythm of survival and obedience. The next target was a ruined city known as Ashfall, a place where shattered towers clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers, and the streets were littered with the remnants of those who had fallen before. Intelligence reported enemy forces entrenched in the upper districts, supported by hidden artillery and snipers with perfect vantage points. Sector Command demanded immediate action, and yet the commander could see the human cost etched across every face beneath his charge. Each order was a choice between survival and obedience, between loyalty and the preservation of the few souls still left to fight. Lieutenant Corvin, now fully recovered but bristling with ambition, approached the commander in the early drizzle. "Sir," he said, eyes sharp beneath his respirator, "we could split the regiment again, flank the city from the east and south simultaneously. Fewer losses, faster victory." The commander studied him carefully. Corvin's plan was sound, but the risk of dispersal in such treacherous terrain was high, and in Krieg, even the most tactical advantage could become a death sentence if cohesion broke. "We move as one," the commander said quietly. "We adapt, yes, but we do not scatter. Every man and woman stays within sight of another. Krieg survives together, or not at all." The march to Ashfall was relentless. Rain fell in sheets, turning streets into rivers of mud and debris, and every step carried the memory of fallen comrades. The soldiers of Krieg moved like phantoms, disciplined and unyielding, their training etched into every movement, their stoicism a shield against the horrors surrounding them. Yet beneath that discipline, tension simmered. Corporal Dresk's group, still wary of endless orders, whispered doubts among themselves. "How many more must die for glory we cannot claim?" one muttered. The commander, passing nearby, let their words reach his ears. He felt the truth in them, but also the weight of leadership. Faith in obedience was fragile yet essential. By mid-morning, the regiment reached the outskirts of Ashfall. Enemy snipers and artillery opened fire immediately, and the streets erupted into chaos. Lasfire tore through the air, explosions shook the crumbling buildings, and the cries of soldiers cut through the storm. The commander moved forward, issuing precise orders, pulling squads from crossfire, and attempting to minimize casualties while still driving the advance. Each decision carried weight. Each hesitation could mean death, and each success was tempered by loss. In the chaos, betrayal found its mark. Lieutenant Corvin, frustrated with the commander's insistence on cohesion, acted on impulse. He redirected a squad without consultation, moving through the streets alone to engage what he perceived as a weak point. For a moment, the maneuver seemed to succeed. Enemy positions were overrun, but then an unseen artillery pit detonated, catching the squad in a deadly crossfire. The screams echoed through Ashfall, and the commander's heart sank as he realized the cost of initiative without obedience. He moved swiftly through the rubble, salvaging what he could, stabilizing the remaining soldiers and confronting Corvin. The young officer's eyes reflected shock and guilt, yet also defiance. "Sir, I tried to save them," he shouted over the din. "We could have ended this faster." The commander's gaze was steady, cold, yet tempered with understanding. "You act alone, and they die," he said quietly. "Obedience is not the enemy of action. It is the only shield we have in a world that seeks to consume us." Hours passed in a blur of fire, mud, and blood. The regiment pushed through Ashfall, claiming streets block by block, yet every advance was marked by casualties. By dusk, the city was under Krieg's control, but the victory felt hollow. Soldiers moved like shadows among the ruins, faces etched with exhaustion, grief, and the haunting knowledge of those who had died to achieve a temporary gain. That night, the commander walked through the trenches and ruined streets, speaking softly to survivors. "We have survived," he said, "but at a cost that will haunt us. Remember those who fell, not as failures, but as part of Krieg. Each life lost carries the weight of every choice we have made. Obedience, loyalty, courage, they are measured not in victories, but in survival and conscience. Somewhere in the darkness, he felt the silent presence of the dead of Kree. Their judgment was unyielding, their gaze eternal, and the commander knew that the weight of their expectations would follow every step forward. In Ashfall, he understood the cruel calculus of war. Obedience preserved life, yet the cost was always measured in souls, and survival was never certain. As the first light of dawn crept over the ruined city, the commander looked over the regiment, now battered but unbroken. The enemy was scattered, but the war was far from over. Betrayal, internal tension, and relentless external pressure had tested them, and he knew that the coming days would be even harsher. And yet, in the eyes of those who remained, he saw the unyielding spirit of Krieg, endurance carved into flesh and bone, loyalty tempered by sacrifice, and the understanding that they marched not for glory, but for survival in a universe that demanded it. The rain had stopped, but the shattered fields were still a morass of mud, broken artillery, and twisted metal. The regiment of Krieg moved cautiously through the remnants of battle, their boots sucking at the earth as though the world itself sought to pull them under. Silence hung over the lines like a living thing, broken only by the occasional distant explosion, the creak of shattered structures, and the hiss of respirators in the cold air. The commander walked at the forefront, surveying the desolate landscape, aware that each step carried the memory of comrades lost and the weight of countless choices yet to be made. The next objective, a ruined industrial complex known as Ironhold, was critical to the wider campaign. Intelligence suggested the enemy had fortified its positions with heavy artillery and defensive automatons, making a direct assault all but suicidal. The commander knew that approaching it with caution was prudent, yet Sector Command demanded speed, insisting that delay was not an option. The tension between obedience and survival had become a constant companion, a gnawing presence that shadowed every decision. Lieutenant Corvin, still recovering from his previous recklessness, approached the commander with a plan for a flanking maneuver. "Sir, if we split the regiment and approach from the north and west, we can reduce casualties and take the defences by surprise," he said. The commander's eyes narrowed beneath his respirator as he considered the risk. Flanking could save lives, yes, but dispersing the regiment in such unforgiving terrain could spell disaster. "We advance as one," he said finally, "but we adapt to circumstances. Every squad maintains sight of another. Cohesion is survival. Always remember that." As they approached Ironhold, the first signs of enemy resistance appeared. Automated sentries opened fire, and las volleys cut through the air with deadly precision. The regiment responded in disciplined unison, advancing slowly, shielding each other from fire, and reclaiming ground inch by inch. Every step was a battle against the terrain as much as against the enemy. Mud and debris threatened to swallow men whole, and the twisted remnants of buildings provided both cover and danger. Corporal Dresk's unit, already weary from days of relentless march and battle, hesitated at the edge of a crater filled with debris and smoke. "We can't keep going like this," one soldier muttered, voice trembling. Dresk silenced them with a glare, but the murmurs persisted. The commander approached, his presence a calm, formidable force. "You endure," he said softly, "because there is no other path. Every life here matters. Each step forward is a choice, a testament to Krieg. We survive together, or we die divided. The assault on Ironhold was brutal. Artillery rained from fortified positions, and enemy automatons advanced with relentless precision. Soldiers fell in the mud, some trapped under rubble, others taken by stray fire, and each loss pressed on the commander's heart like a physical weight. He moved among them, issuing orders, rescuing those he could, and adjusting tactics with a measured calm that belied the storm of chaos around him. Amid the fighting, a deeper fracture revealed itself. Lieutenant Corvan, emboldened by prior actions, again acted without authorization, diverting a squad to take a separate objective. For a fleeting moment, it seemed effective. The squad engaged enemy units and disrupted their lines, but the maneuver exposed them to a hidden artillery pit, and the squad suffered heavy casualties. Corvan returned to the commander, pale and shaken, but defiant. "I saved what I could," he shouted, voice cracking. "I acted to protect them." The commander's gaze was cold, but tempered with understanding. "You act alone, and lives are lost. Initiative without obedience is not courage. It is recklessness. We survive through discipline, not impulse. Remember that." Corvan's eyes reflected guilt and frustration, yet he nodded, understanding the fine line between heroism and disaster in Krieg's regiment. By evening, Ironhold had been claimed, but the victory was Pyrrhic. The regiment was battered, their numbers reduced, and the survivors moved like ghosts through the smoke and ruin. The commander surveyed the field, noting the silence of the fallen, the shattered defenses, and the unending horizon of destruction. Every choice, every order, every act of bravery had been paid for in blood, and the weight of command pressed heavier with each loss. That night, the commander walked among his soldiers in the trenches and ruins, speaking softly. "We endure," he said, voice low. "Not for glory, not for recognition, but because we choose to survive together. Every step forward is for those who fell before us and those who will follow. Remember them. Remember Krieg. And remember that the cost of survival is never cheap." In the shadows, he could feel the unseen presence of the dead of Krieg, their judgment unwavering, their eyes eternal. They demanded loyalty, sacrifice, and obedience, and the commander knew that their expectations would shadow him through every choice, every decision, and every battle yet to come. The march toward survival continued, relentless and unyielding, as the regiment prepared for the trials that the next day would bring. The rain had ceased, leaving the shattered fields slick with mud and strewn with the remnants of countless battles. Smoke curled from burned-out structures, and the stench of blood and decay hung in the air, a reminder that victory came only at the cost of countless lives. The regiment of Krieg moved cautiously through the ruins, their boots sinking into the quagmire, rifles held tightly, respirators hissing with each measured breath. The commander led from the front, eyes scanning the horizon for both enemy and hazard, acutely aware that every step carried the weight of responsibility and every decision could mean life or death. Their next objective was a fortified settlement known as Iron Gate, perched on a jagged ridge and heavily defended by enemy artillery and infantry. Sector Command demanded its capture to secure supply lines and maintain momentum in the campaign. The commander studied the maps, noting the narrow approaches and precarious ridges. The assault would be costly, perhaps catastrophic, yet delay was unacceptable. Obedience to orders and preservation of life were in constant tension, a balancing act that weighed on every officer and soldier alike. Lieutenant Corvan approached, walking carefully over the mud-soaked terrain. His face, pale but resolute, reflected both determination and a lingering unease from prior failures. "Sir," he said quietly, "if we flank from the eastern side and suppress their artillery first, we might minimize losses, but it will require some squads to act independently." The commander's gaze lingered on him, weighing the risk of dispersal against the need to preserve life. "We move together," he replied. "Discipline is our shield. Survival depends on cohesion, but adapt as circumstances demand. Every squad maintains sight of another." The approach to Iron Gate was a gauntlet. Artillery shells tore through the air, trenches collapsed, and lasfire cut deadly streaks across the battlefield. The soldiers of Krieg moved as one, advancing with a precision born of decades of training and the memory of their homeworld. Each step was an act of endurance, each breath a testament to willpower, each glance at the fallen a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. Internal tension grew as exhaustion and fear began to fracture the regiment. Corporal Dresk's squad, already shaken by the relentless advance, whispered doubts about the purpose of their march. "How many more must die for orders we barely understand?" one muttered. Dresk silenced them with a glare, but the murmurs persisted, spreading subtly through the ranks. The commander passed among them, his presence commanding yet calm. "You endure because there is no other path," he said softly. "Every life here matters. Every step forward is a testament to Krieg. Obedience and courage are intertwined. Division is death." The battle for Iron Gate erupted at midday. Enemy fortifications and artillery were deadly, and the regiment suffered significant casualties. Soldiers fell into mud-filled craters, others were caught in collapsing buildings, and the relentless advance tested their endurance to the limit. The commander moved among them, issuing orders, rescuing those in peril, and adjusting tactics to account for the evolving battlefield. Each decision carried weight, each hesitation could be fatal, and each success was shadowed by the cost paid in blood. Lieutenant Corvan's ambition once again flared dangerously. Seeking to prove himself, he led a squad in a risky maneuver without prior authorization, attempting to seize an enemy gun emplacement. For a moment, it seemed effective. The emplacement was overrun, but the squad was soon caught in a trap, pinned under concentrated fire. Screams and shouts echoed through the ruins, and the commander's chest tightened with the knowledge that initiative without coordination had cost more lives. He confronted Corvan amid the chaos. "You act alone, and lives are lost. Courage without discipline is recklessness," he said quietly. Corvan's eyes reflected both guilt and defiance, the fine line between heroism and disaster laid bare before him. By nightfall, Iron Gate was taken, but at immense cost. The regiment was battered, their numbers diminished, and the survivors moved through the ruins like shadows, faces etched with exhaustion, grief, and the memory of those who had fallen. The commander surveyed the field, noting the silence of the dead and the unyielding horizon of destruction. Every order, every decision, every act of bravery had been paid for in blood, and the weight of leadership pressed heavier with each loss. As darkness fell, he moved through the trenches and ruined streets, speaking softly to those who remained. "We endure," he said, voice low, "not for glory, but because we must. Each step forward is for those who fell before us and those who will follow. Remember them. Remember Krieg. And remember that survival demands both discipline and sacrifice." In the shadows, the commander could feel the unseen presence of Krieg's dead, their judgment eternal and unyielding. They demanded loyalty, endurance, and courage, and he knew their eyes would follow him in every decision, every movement, and every battle yet to come. The march toward survival continued, relentless and unbroken, as the regiment prepared for the trials the coming day would bring, aware that the war had begun to exact not just physical, but psychological tolls that could fracture even the strongest of spirits. The first light of dawn over Iron Gate revealed a landscape carved by fire and mud, the remnants of shattered buildings casting long, twisted shadows over the regiment of Krieg. The air was thick with smoke and the lingering stench of blood and death. Soldiers moved wearily through the ruins, their respirators hissing with each breath, their boots sinking into the sodden earth. The commander walked at the forefront, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of enemy movement and traps, acutely aware that every decision could carry the weight of life or death for those under his command. Intelligence reported that the enemy had retreated only temporarily, regrouping to launch a counter-offensive from the western ridge. The commander knew that hesitation would cost more lives, yet speed without caution would be equally deadly. He gathered his lieutenants, briefing them quietly among the ruins. "We strike at first light," he said, voice low but firm. "We advance with precision, protecting one another. Every squad remains in contact. Krieg survives as one, or it does not survive at all." Lieutenant Corvan, pale and tense from the cumulative stress of recent battles, approached him. "Sir," he said, "if we split into 3 columns, we could surround the ridge. We could force their retreat before they have a chance to consolidate." The commander considered the proposal carefully. Splitting forces carried immense risk, yet the terrain demanded flexibility. "We will adapt," he said finally, "but cohesion remains our shield. Each squad must see another. No one acts alone. Discipline saves lives. Recklessness destroys them." The march to the western ridge was grueling. Mud and rubble slowed progress, while sporadic artillery fire from hidden emplacements kept the soldiers on edge. Every step forward was a struggle against exhaustion, fear, and the weight of countless losses. The regiment moved with the precision of machines, their discipline forged over decades of unbroken campaigns. Yet beneath their stoicism simmered tension, doubt, and quiet resentment. Internal conflict surfaced more clearly than ever. Corporal Dresk's unit, still haunted by the constant death and the relentless pace, muttered questions of purpose. "How many more must fall for orders we barely comprehend?" one whispered. Dresk silenced them with a glare, but unease spread subtly through the ranks. The commander passed among them, voice calm but commanding. "Endure because there is no other path," he said softly. "Every life here matters. Every step forward honors the dead. Obedience and courage are intertwined. Division is death." The battle erupted as they reached the western ridge. Enemy artillery pounded their flanks, automated sentries advanced with unyielding precision, and snipers picked off exposed soldiers. The regiment responded in disciplined unison, advancing inch by inch, shielding each other and reclaiming ground block by block. Each victory was bought at a staggering cost. Limbs lost, lives extinguished, spirits crushed. Yet they pressed on, compelled by duty and the weight of Krieg's legacy. Amid the chaos, Corvan once again took independent action. Seeking to prove his value and protect his men, he diverted a squad to secure an apparent weak point in the enemy line. For a fleeting moment, the maneuver seemed effective. The enemy was disrupted, but the squad became trapped under concentrated fire, suffering heavy casualties. The commander confronted him amidst the smoke and rubble. "You act alone, and lives are lost," he said quietly but firmly. "Initiative without coordination is recklessness. Discipline is our shield, courage its reinforcement. Remember this, or more will die. Corvin's face showed guilt and frustration, understanding the razor-thin boundary between heroism and disaster in Krieg's regiment. By late afternoon, the western ridge had been secured, but the victory was Pyrrhic. The regiment was battered and diminished, their numbers far fewer than at the campaign's start. The survivors moved like shadows through mud-strewn trenches, faces etched with exhaustion, grief, and the haunting presence of those who had fallen. The commander surveyed the battlefield, noting the silence of the dead, the ruined defences, and the relentless horizon of destruction. Every order, every decision, every act of bravery had been paid for in blood, and the weight of command pressed heavier with each loss. That night the commander walked among his men, speaking softly through the mist and ruins. "We endure," he said, voice low, "not for glory, not for recognition, but because survival demands it. Each step forward is for those who fell before us and those who will follow. Remember them. Remember Krieg. And remember that survival requires both courage and discipline." In the darkness, he felt the unyielding presence of Krieg's dead, their judgment eternal, their eyes unseen yet undeniable. They demanded loyalty, endurance, and unshakable courage. The commander knew their expectations would follow him in every decision, every movement, and every battle yet to come. The march toward survival continued, relentless and unbroken, yet the psychological toll on the regiment grew heavier with each passing day, threatening to fracture even the most steadfast souls. The sky over the shattered fields had darkened to an oppressive grey, heavy with clouds that threatened rain but offered only a suffocating stillness. The regiment of Krieg had advanced beyond the western ridge, their boots sinking into mud and ash, their respirators hissing with the collective effort of survival. Each step forward was a test of endurance, every breath a reminder of those who had fallen along the way. The commander moved at the forefront, eyes scanning the horizon for threats both seen and unseen, aware that the coming battle would demand more than strategy. It would demand sacrifice. Their next objective was the citadel of Ashmar, a ruined fortress perched atop jagged cliffs, long held as a bastion by the enemy. Intelligence suggested it was defended not only by troops, but by automated defense systems, hidden artillery, and chemical deterrence. Sector Command demanded its capture to maintain the campaign's momentum. Yet the commander understood that each order carried a cost measured in lives and loyalty. Every decision would test the boundaries of obedience, courage, and conscience. Lieutenant Corvin approached him, his face pale, eyes sharp beneath the respirator. "Sir, if we divide the regiment into 3 coordinated columns, we could envelop the citadel, reduce exposure, and secure it more efficiently." The commander studied him carefully, weighing the risk. "We move together, adapt where necessary, but cohesion remains our shield. Discipline saves lives, recklessness destroys them. Every squad remains within sight of another." Corvin nodded. A mixture of frustration and resolve etched into his features. As the regiment advanced, enemy fire intensified. Artillery shells ripped through the mud, snipers picked off the exposed, and automated turrets unleashed a relentless hail of energy. Soldiers fell into craters and collapsed buildings, and the regiment's movement became a careful, deliberate push forward. The commander moved among his men, issuing orders, rescuing the wounded, and adjusting tactics with a measured calm that belied the chaos around him. Every choice carried weight, every hesitation could be fatal, and every success came at a staggering cost. Amidst the chaos, Internal tensions reached a breaking point. Lieutenant Corvan, frustrated with the constraints of discipline, attempted another independent maneuver, diverting a squad to flank what he believed was a weak point. For a moment, the move seemed to succeed. The enemy position faltered, but then a hidden artillery cache detonated, pinning the squad under rubble and fire. The commander confronted him amid the smoke and ruin. "You act alone, and lives are lost," he said quietly but firmly. "Courage without coordination is recklessness. Discipline and loyalty are the only shields that save us." Corvan's eyes reflected guilt and defiance, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on him. The battle for the citadel raged for hours. Smoke choked the streets, fire consumed what remained of buildings, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the ruins. Soldiers fought with grim determination, their endurance tested beyond the limits of body and mind. Corpses of friend and foe alike littered the battlefield, each one a stark reminder of the cost of obedience, the fragility of life, and the unyielding demands of Krieg. As night fell, the citadel of Ashmar finally fell into Krieg's control, but the victory was hollow. The regiment had endured immense losses, and the survivors moved like shadows through mud and ruin, faces etched with exhaustion, grief, and the burden of their choices. The commander surveyed the aftermath, noting the silence of the dead, the destruction of the fortress, and the relentless horizon of ash and smoke. Every order, every act of bravery, every act of defiance had been paid for in blood. In the quiet that followed, the commander addressed his men, voice low but carrying through the ruins. "We endure not for glory or recognition, but because survival demands it. Each step forward is for those who fell before us and for those who will follow. Remember them. Remember Krieg. And remember that obedience, courage, and loyalty are intertwined. Without one, the others are meaningless." In the shadows, the commander felt the presence of Krieg's dead, their judgment unyielding, their eyes eternal. He understood that their expectations would follow him and his regiment through every choice, every movement, and every battle yet to come. The emotional toll was heavy, the internal fractures deepening, and the battles ahead promised to test not only the soldiers' bodies, but the very fabric of their loyalty, courage, and humanity. The storm of war pressed closer, and the next day would demand choices that could fracture the regiment forever. The dawn broke over the citadel of Ashmar like a pale, trembling light, filtered through smoke and the lingering haze of battle. The regiment of Krieg stood among the ruins, their uniforms soaked in mud and blood, respirators hissing with each laborious breath. The aftermath of previous battles had left them battered, physically and mentally, yet the march forward continued. The commander walked at the forefront, eyes scanning the horizon, aware that the next engagement would test not only their discipline, but their very souls. Every step carried the weight of countless decisions, each echoing the lives lost and the loyalty demanded by Krieg. Intelligence reported that enemy reinforcements were massing in the valley below the citadel, supported by mechanized units and automated artillery. Sector Command ordered a preemptive strike, insisting on speed, yet the commander understood the human cost that awaited. Splitting forces might achieve tactical advantage, but it risked fracturing the already strained regiment. "We advance together," he told his lieutenants, voice steady yet somber. "Coordination and discipline will save lives. We adapt, but never alone. Krieg survives as one, or not at all." Lieutenant Corvan, haunted by prior failures and the deaths of his men, approached, proposing a flanking maneuver. "Sir, if we take the eastern ravine and strike their mechanized units from behind. We might break their lines quickly, he said. The commander regarded him carefully, seeing both desperation and determination. We flank as one, with sight lines maintained. Courage without coordination is recklessness. Obedience is our shield, and discipline its reinforcement. Remember that. Corvan nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing into his every motion. The march down into the valley was brutal. Mud and debris slowed movement, while sporadic enemy fire kept nerves taut. Artillery shells shredded the earth. Automated sentries advanced without pause, and snipers picked off exposed soldiers with relentless precision. Each step forward was an act of endurance, every breath a testament to survival, and every glance at fallen comrades a stark reminder of the cost of loyalty and obedience. As the regiment engaged the enemy, internal tensions reached their apex. Corvan, driven by guilt and ambition, attempted an independent maneuver once more, diverting a squad to seize what he perceived as a vulnerable position. For a fleeting moment, the move seemed effective. Enemy positions faltered, yet the trap set by hidden artillery and ambush fire turned his squad into a slaughtered remnant. The commander confronted him amidst the chaos, voice quiet but unwavering. You act alone, and lives are lost. Initiative without coordination is folly. Discipline and loyalty are the only shields that save us. Remember, Corvan, courage is meaningless without obedience. The battle surged with intensity. Explosions shook the valley. Fire consumed what remained of enemy fortifications, and soldiers fell in droves. Corpses of friend and foe littered the mud, each loss an unbearable reminder of the sacrifices demanded by Krieg. The regiment pressed forward, pushing through exhaustion, grief, and fear, each step forward a testament to their endurance and to the harsh teachings of their homeworld. By dusk, the valley was secured, but the victory was hollow. The regiment had survived, but at a staggering cost. Their numbers were diminished, spirits frayed, and the psychological toll of endless sacrifice pressed heavily upon them. Survivors moved through the ruins like shadows, faces etched with exhaustion, grief, and the lingering presence of those who had fallen. The commander surveyed the battlefield, noting the silence of the dead, the devastation wrought upon the land, and the unending horizon of destruction. That night, he spoke quietly to his remaining soldiers. We endure not for glory, but because survival demands it. Each step forward honors those who fell before us and those who will follow. Remember them. Remember Krieg. And remember that obedience, courage, and loyalty are intertwined. Without one, the others are meaningless. In the darkness, the commander could feel the presence of Krieg's dead, their judgment unyielding, their eyes eternal. He knew that their expectations would follow him in every decision, every movement, and every battle yet to come. The regiment had been tested to the edge of endurance, and the next engagement would demand sacrifices that might fracture even the strongest bonds of loyalty and courage. The storm of war pressed closer, and the final choices loomed on the horizon, ready to decide not only survival, but the very fate of the regiment. The first light of dawn struggled through the thick, acrid smoke that clung to the ruins of Ashmar Valley. The regiment of Krieg, battered, bloodied, and hollowed by relentless conflict, moved forward with a grim determination that seemed almost unnatural. Faces were pale beneath respirators, eyes haunted by the memories of comrades lost, yet the discipline instilled over generations compelled them onward. The commander led from the front, every step a testament to endurance, every glance a weighing of life against duty, knowing that the final confrontation would demand more than strategy, It would demand sacrifice, loyalty, and the unyielding will to endure. The enemy had gathered its remaining forces at the heart of the valley, fortified by twisted machinery, automated sentries, and chemical deterrents designed to rend both body and spirit. Sector Command demanded their annihilation. The survival of the regiment depended on it. The commander surveyed the battlefield, noting every ridge, every ruined structure, every potential ambush. The choice before him was absolute: press forward and risk annihilation, or retreat and surrender the lives of those who had already survived impossible odds. Lieutenant Corvin approached, his face drawn and pale. He had grown quieter in recent days, the weight of prior failures and the deaths of his men pressing heavily upon him. "Sir," he said softly, "if we strike their defenses directly, we might break them quickly. But the casualties—" His voice faltered, unsaid, but understood. The commander placed a hand on his shoulder. "We endure, Corvin, because Krieg does not yield. Each life lost is a shadow upon our conscience, but survival, even tempered by sacrifice, is our mandate. We fight together, or we perish divided." The advance was merciless. Mud and debris turned every step into a struggle. Enemy fire shredded the earth, and automated defenses tore through the ranks with impersonal precision. Soldiers fell in droves, some swallowed by craters, others crushed beneath debris, and the living pressed onward, moving as one. Their discipline the thin line between survival and extinction. The commander moved among them, issuing orders, rallying those who faltered, and witnessing the human cost of every decision. Corvin, now fully aware of the consequences of previous independent actions, stayed close to the commander, his defiance tempered by guilt and understanding. Yet even in his restraint, the internal tensions of the regiment were evident. Murmurs of doubt, exhaustion, and fear coursed through the lines, threatening to fracture the cohesion that had been their shield. The commander's voice, calm but commanding, cut through the haze. "Endure. Every step honors the dead. Every action preserves the living. Krieg is more than strategy. It is sacrifice, discipline, and the bond that binds us. Without it, we are nothing." The climactic assault began at midday. Artillery erupted, automated turrets blazed, and chemical weapons coated the battlefield with a choking fog. The soldiers of Krieg moved relentlessly, advancing block by block, trench by trench, through mud, fire, and the cries of the dying. Each victory was won at staggering cost. Every inch of ground was paid for with blood and endurance. The commander, resolute yet human in his grief, guided his regiment with unwavering focus, making choices that balanced the lives of the many against the desperate courage of the few. As the day waned, the enemy stronghold fell. Smoke rose from shattered machinery, fire consumed what remained of fortifications, and silence descended like a heavy shroud. The survivors of Krieg moved among the ruins, their numbers reduced, their spirits scarred, and their minds weighed with the losses they had endured. The commander surveyed the battlefield, noting the absence of those who had given their lives and the eerie calm that followed the storm of combat. Every order, every act of courage, every moment of defiance had been paid for in blood, yet the regiment endured. That evening, the commander addressed the remaining soldiers. "We have survived," he said, voice low and heavy with reflection. "Not for glory, not for recognition, but because survival demands sacrifice. Each step forward honors those who fell before us and those who will follow. Remember them. Remember Krieg. Obedience, loyalty, and courage are not mere words. They are our shield, our bond, and our legacy." As darkness fell over Ashmar Valley, he felt the silent presence of Krieg's dead, their judgment eternal and unyielding. The weight of their expectations would follow the survivors through every choice, every decision, and every future battle. The regiment had endured the ultimate test, the convergence of external and internal trials, the relentless pressure of combat, and the burden of leadership. Though scarred and diminished, they had survived, and in that survival lay both the triumph and the tragedy of Krieg. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The remnants of the regiment moved forward through the ash and mud, their eyes carrying the memories of those who would never rise again. The commander, walking at their head, understood the truth of their existence. Immortality was a curse measured not in years, but in the endless procession of loss, loyalty, and sacrifice. The age of Ashmar Valley had ended, but the legacy of those who endured would echo through the history of Krieg for all time.